Good morning. Now that you've heard our intelligent discussion about chlorine in the water. We're going to get started back in the True North series. If I can get all my stuff together here. Back in the True North series. And today we are talking about dealing with opposition. So look at Matthew chapter 10, verse 16 through 33. And answer your question, yes, there's been a lot of chlorine in the water. Yeah. It's dissipating out. Matthew 10, 16 through 33. Look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be as shrewd as snakes and harmless as doves. But beware, for you'll be handed over to the courts and be flogged with whips in the synagogues. You'll stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell the rulers and other unbelievers about me. When you're arrested, don't worry about how to respond or what to say. God will give you the right words at the right time. For it is not you who will be speaking. It will be the Spirit of your Father speaking through you. A brother will betray his brother to death. A father will betray his own child, and children will rebel against their parents and cause them to be killed. And all nations will hate you because you are my followers. But everyone who endures to the end will be saved. When you're persecuted in one town, flee to the next. I tell you the truth, the Son of Man will return before you have reached all of the towns of Israel. Students are not greater than their teacher, and slaves are not greater than their master. Students are to be like their teacher, and slaves are to be like their master. And since I, the master of the household, have been called the prince of demons, the members of my household will be called by even worse names. But don't be afraid of those who threaten you, for the time is coming when everything that's covered will be revealed. And all that is secret will be made known to all. What I tell you now is in the darkness. Shout abroad when daybreak comes. What I whisper in your ear, shout from the housetops for all to hear. Don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They cannot touch your soul. Fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell. But what is the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow can fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head are all numbered. So don't be afraid. You are more valuable to God than the whole flock of sparrows. Everyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But everyone who denies me here on earth, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. All right. I lost my place there. We've been talking about finding true north in your life, finding the path that you should be on. And the way you do that is by finding true north. If you've ever been lost in the woods, if you know where true north is on your compass heading, you can find somewhere else. If you need to head west, if you need to head south, whatever, you got to have true north on your compass heading though. And the true north in our lives should be Jesus. He's the one who gives our lives meanings. He's the one that moves us to the next direction. And we've been covering that. Okay, so hopefully by now you believe that. If you don't believe it, you haven't been listening. Okay? But the next step now is, okay, now that you found your true north, what do you do? Now that you know that you're supposed to be following Christ, what does that mean in your day-to-day life? And do you have something you should be doing? I believe there's no such thing as an ungifted Christian. That every Christian has gifts. Every Christian has abilities. Every Christian has ways that they need to do, ways they need to go and things they need to do. But what do you do when somebody doesn't like what you're doing? What do you do when you face opposition? When you stand up to your unsafe family members and say, hey, I'm a Christian now, or your old buddies that you used to party with. What do you do now? How do you face opposition? So that's what we're going to talk about today. What do you do when people persecute you? When they make fun of you because of your faith, or they don't understand, and so they just think you're stupid, or this or that, or whatever. How do you handle that? Well, that's what today's lesson is, okay? For a long time, growing up, I thought persecution was something that happened in Russia and, Middle Eastern countries, or if you were Christian, they put you to death. But there's a lot of different kinds of persecution. We face persecution here in America. If you stand up and say you're a Christian, There are people who automatically say that you're a bigot and you're a racist and you're horrible and you don't love science and they have all these prepackaged things that go with being a Christian in today's society. None of them are true. Not across the board. Are there Christians who are racist? No. There are people who are racist that call themselves Christians. Right? Calling yourself a Christian doesn't make you a Christian. Calling yourself a chicken McNugget doesn't make you a chicken McNugget. Although you would be delicious dipped in hot mustard. No. Okay. All right. Here's the thing though. We watch the headline, I read the headlines and I watch the news and I think the world is gone crazy. And if I'm a Christian, I got it really bad. I'm a middle-aged Christian white guy. According to everybody else, I hate the world. If you're white, yeah, all right. If you're brown, don't come around. And if you're black, don't come back. That's what I'm supposed to believe. I don't believe any of that. I'm just foolish enough to believe we're all God's children. Okay? So, the problem is this has kind of snuck up on the church in the last few years. And a lot of people don't know how to handle it. They don't know how to handle being oppressed, being persecuted. Shouldn't be a surprise. Look at 2 Timothy 3:12. Yes, and everyone who wants to live a godly life in Christ Jesus will suffer persecution. Not might, not, hey, it could happen to you. Will. Everyone who wants to live a godly life. Now, how do you know if you're living a godly life? The persecution comes with it. How do you know if you're not? Maybe it's because you're not being persecuted. Maybe it's because nobody is looking down on you for your beliefs. If you're not professing your beliefs, if people don't know that you're a Christian, they're not going to look down at you for being a Christian. There's the old saying years ago about if you were put on trial for being a Christian, would there be enough evidence to convict you? Don't know, would there? If you're facing opposition because of your Christian beliefs. Now understand, there is a difference, by the way, between being opposed because of your Christian beliefs and being opposed because you're just being a jerk. If you're one of those idiots that walks around and points his finger at everybody's face, you're going to hell if you don't know Jesus. If that's you, you're going to get punched. And it's not, I'm suffering for Jesus. No, you're suffering for being stupid. You're suffering for being a loudmouth. You walk up to somebody, shake your finger in their face and yell that they're going to hell, you're going to get punched. And you deserve it. Show me in the Bible where Jesus did that. Nowhere. In fact, Jesus didn't talk to sinners about hell. He talked to Christians about hell. He talked to sinners about heaven. Because we don't scare people into the kingdom. We bring them in. But I want to give you a couple ideas about persecution. First of all, most opposition comes in the form of a personal attack. Okay? Well, Christians are stupid. You'll hear that on TV. Okay, well, that's kind of personal. All right? Most opposition is going to come in a personal attack like that. It's going to come where they're going to tell you right to your face. Well, you're a Christian? How can you believe that? The great God of the Oreo cookies. How can you believe that? And you know what? Years ago, Bill Maher made a movie called Religulous. Kind of a cross between religious and ridiculous. And everybody was talking about Bill Maher. And I was writing a newspaper column at the time. And I wrote in my column, I'm not mad at Bill Maher. I'm not mad at Bill Maher about what he says. He's ignorant. And ignorant is not a derogatory term. Ignorant means you don't know something. He doesn't know about Jesus. Who am I mad at? I'm mad at all the people that had a chance to tell him about Jesus over the years and maybe didn't. I'm mad at all the Christians who put on a really bad example in front of him about what Christians were. The worst advertisement for Jesus sometimes is Christians. We were driving in a marked unit. We were headed to a conference, me and a deputy. We're in a marked unit. I mean, we're not like we're hiding that it's a police car. It's a police car. It's got the signs on the side, the stars and everything. And this woman passes us. We're outside Imperial County, though. We were in Riverside County. This woman passes us, and on the back of her car, she has a bumper sticker advertising a local church. And I got to be honest with you, it just ticked me off. Here you're passing a symbol of authority, and you're breaking the law in front of us. Now, I'm sure she didn't think we could pull her over because it wasn't state of California. I mean, it wasn't Imperial County. What she doesn't know is you're a state peace officer. Our guys could pull over cars anywhere in the state if they wanted. Dummies. No, because then we'd have to get a ticket book to write her to Riverside County, because we can't make her go to court in a different county from the infraction. But I asked the deputy, I said, does it bother you when you see that? He says, just makes me not believe in Christianity. Here I am, I'm busting my hump trying to witness to this guy, trying to get this guy to believe in Jesus. And some moron in a car drives past us and basically flips us off. That's what hurts Christians. That's what makes Christians not be as believable. So it's going to come in a personal attack because they're going to look at everything bad that you've done or someone else has done, and they're going to throw it up in your face. Second thing is, opposition usually hits you when you're weak or where you're weak and or defenseless. They'll look for a weakness. Oh, his life's out of control. His kids are out of control. He doesn't dress well. He's got all these beliefs that aren't right. They'll attack you where you're weak. The media has made hay out of doing this. You heard of cancel culture? These guys will dredge up something you said 20 years ago, and they want to think that the Constitution changes and that the world changes, right? That a man can become a woman if he wants to. Very rarely, by the way, seen that work. They're usually really ugly women. I'm just saying. Okay. Bruce Jenner, if you're listening, let's go back to Bruce. Okay. Anyway, they'll find something you said 20 years ago, and instead of thinking that maybe you've grown and your opinion has changed, they'll attack you with it and cancel culture. And all of a sudden now you're looking for jobs. You can't get jobs in Hollywood. Did you know that there is an organization in Hollywood called Friends of Abe? And it's conservatives. It's Christians and all conservatives, because they can't say that they're conservatives in Hollywood or they'll never work again. Just a few months ago, I don't remember what movie star it was, said they refused to do a movie with somebody who was a conservative. That's political oppression. How much more is it when you're talking about Jesus? So I'm going to give you 4 things today that you can do when you run into oppression. 4 things you can do when somebody is opposing you. Okay. First of all, be soft-hearted, not soft-headed. Look at Matthew 10:16. Look, I'm sending you out as sheep among wolves. So be as shrewd as snakes and as harmless as doves. In Matthew 22, some Pharisees, and Jesus had to do this. In Matthew 22, Jesus is talking, and some Pharisees came to him and tried to trick him into either defending or condemning Rome. They come up to him and said, hey, should a Jew pay taxes to Rome? Now understand, Rome was an invading army. The Jews and the Romans didn't live together because they wanted to. They lived together because they had to. The Romans took over Israel. And Israel was none too happy about it. So there's a whole problem there. And so if he says, you should support Rome. Oh, well, you're not a loyal Jew. Right? That's their next statement. And he says, well, no, don't support Rome because being Jewish is where it's at. Then they say, well, they could turn him in for being against Rome. But Jesus is no dummy. He knows what's going on. Look what he says in Matthew 22. I love this. Jesus knew their evil motives. You hypocrites, he said. Why are you trying to trap me? Here, show me the coin used for the tax. When they handed him a Roman coin, he asked, whose picture and title are stamped on it? Caesar's, they replied. Well then, he said, Give to Caesar what belongs to Caesar, and give to God what belongs to God. Right? It's a pretty smart answer. Pretty shrewd. Because he's saying, look, part of your life, you owe something to Rome. All of your life, you owe to God. So he didn't fall into that trick. I've said for years, well, some of the time, I'll say, well, this isn't my first rodeo. I'm not easily duped. Still amazes me. I taught school in a Christian school with high school kids and junior high kids. It always amazed me how parents would come to me, their kid would get in trouble, and they say, well, my Johnny would never do that. Oh, sorry, Johnny. Well, yeah, Johnny would. Yeah, you're a little angel. And you're sitting there every now and then, and I'm just really plain sometimes, sitting there, and every now and then you just want to say, look, the problem is your kid's a moron. Parents don't really want you to say that to them, though. They get offended by that. Although they should know. I mean, they raised them. All right? I always wondered if people with ugly kids knew their kids were ugly. Think about that for a minute. How many times do you talk to somebody, here, let me introduce you to my beautiful daughter. Ooh. Ooh. Beautiful? Not so much. These are things I worry about. Things I think about. Yeah, exactly. I would have students who are failing, and their parents would come and get all upset. Well, why are they failing? And I would ask them, all right, wait a second. Did you see them studying at any point during the semester? At any point, did you ask them, are you ready for Friday's test? Yeah, I'm ready. Really? Because you didn't bring your books home to study? Well, I got it. Look, most of the kids in my classes were at a Christian school because they'd been kicked out of public school. Or were about to get kicked out of public school. They weren't there because they wanted to be. They were there because that was like their last refuge. I had a few students who wanted a Christian education. Most of them were just trying to get away from public school. I had one kid who came in and he says, yeah, I'm a senior. So I ordered his transcripts from the high school. He didn't have enough credits to be a second semester freshman. He literally, his sophomore, junior, and senior year, he literally had no credits. None. And the school kept telling him, oh, you're a junior now. Why? Just because I've been on campus for 3 years, now I'm a junior? No. He was like 18 or something? He almost was. So I told him, I said, well, you're never going to graduate from high school. Let's just get you your GED and help you out. Because that's all at that point, that's all he's going to do. He's 17.
The security was stopping him on the campus. Excuse me, sir.
Yeah. Well, he drove his wife and kids to school. No. Look, I've had parents that were shocked when they found out their kids had drug problems. Well, did you look at your kid objectively? Did you notice his eyes are running and he walks around lethargically? Did you maybe notice that something was wrong? But we have a built-in thing that wants us to believe people. And sometimes you got to get past that. And it's hard because we want to believe that people are good. But you can't let that wanting to believe in everybody being good strip away the idea that you know that not everybody is. You cannot be an effective parent or an effective boss or an effective leader if you're easily deceived. You need to know what's what and what isn't. Don't be soft-headed. Don't be foolishly naive. You have to be soft-hearted without being soft-headed.
Hey, Jerry, my Bible right here says, why tempt ye me? I don't know why it says that.
It's a different version than the one I'm reading from. That's probably King James Version.
Did Jesus get tempted? I don't know.
Well, that's what he's saying there. When in our version where it says, why are you trying to trick me? But yeah, Jesus was tempted. Remember, he did 40 days out in the wilderness. Yeah. And the devil himself came and tempted him. Understand this, that if Jesus couldn't have been tempted, then his death on the cross doesn't mean anything. Because he had to go through what we go through. Make sense? It's a great question. But yeah, that's a different version. That's probably King James. Look at Colossians 4:5. Live wisely among those who are not believers and make the most of every opportunity. Be smart. Be smart around people that aren't believers. Be soft-hearted. Don't be soft-headed. And this ties in with this next one. Don't underestimate what others are capable of doing. For many people, even the people who ran airports, nobody ever thought that 9/11 could happen here. And yet, sure enough, it did. We underestimated our enemy. We had never had an attack on American soil, not a large-scale one like that. And we thought, yeah, we're okay. We weren't. They caught us vulnerable. They caught us napping. We underestimated what they're capable of doing, and because of that, people died. When you underestimate your enemy, it's a bad thing to have happen. Matthew 10:17. But beware, for you'll be handed over to the courts and be flogged with whips in the synagogues. You'll stand trial before governors and kings because you are my followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell the rulers and other unbelievers about me. We don't like this verse. We don't want to read this verse because it says we're going to be handed over to the courts and flogged. And people are going to be mean to you and say na to you. You'll stand trial because you are Jesus' followers. But this will be your opportunity to tell others about me. Steve Camp told the story years ago about being in a he did a concert, and it was a really small concert. He was friends with Keith Green, who was a very powerful singer, amazing man. And so Camp tells the story that he got robbed on his way out of his concert. And he said, being a Christian artist, there wasn't very much money there. And so they robbed me, they hit me, they broke my jaw. And he says, I called Keith Green and said, hey, Keith, man, I got robbed tonight. Keith Green said, did you tell him about Jesus? And Steve Camp says, no, they broke my jaw. I was busy trying to not die. Keith Green said, I don't have time to hear you feel sorry for yourself. And he hung up. Steve Camp said, it bugged me. It bugged me that he would say that. And then I thought about it. I should have told them about Jesus. I should have let them know about Jesus. Is it easy right then? No. But who said life was easy? Yeah. Should have told them about Jesus. Which Jesus said in Matthew 10:21. A brother will betray his brother to death. A father will betray his own child, and children will rebel against their parents and cause them to be killed. And all nations will hate you because you're my follower. Those are disturbing words. But we need to not underestimate our enemy. Who's our enemy? The devil. And you can look at the devil one of two ways. You can look at the devil and be scared to death that he's out there. Or you can look at the devil and say, okay, you're here, but I've read the end of the book and I win. Right? I've read the end of the Bible and we win. My Bible says, greater is he that's in me than he that's in the world. So don't walk around feeling sorry for, well, the devil's really after me today. I hate hearing that in church. Growing up in church, we'd have those testimony times. Well, the devil's been after me this week. It sounds like he caught you. I'm not giving the devil his due. But I'm not going to underestimate what he'll do to me. I'm not going to underestimate how he'll try to tempt me. The things that he'll try to do to make me turn from Jesus. I'm not going to underestimate that. But I'm not going to dwell on it either.
People actually say that in church?
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that was old school church. We don't do that at Remnant. Yeah. Look, what Jesus is saying in these verses is not that we're constantly going to be overwhelmed. What he is saying is we need to be aware. When it comes to what others are capable of, don't be naive. Be street smart. If a brother will condemn his brother to death will betray him until death, we got to understand that people are going to do bad things. It shouldn't shock us when people are bad. It really shouldn't. Why? Because people are bad. That's why they need Jesus. I've had a really weird life because at one point I'm working at the sheriff's office and I am investigating crime scenes and all this other stuff. And on the other side, on Sunday, I'm preaching in a church. That's just kind of a weird life. I've had, because I used to write, like I said, I used to write a newspaper column in the church too. And I've had people that would say, Daniel, would you do me a favor and shut that curtain? It's flashing on the camera. Or maybe it's this one over here. It's this one over here. Sorry. All right. I've had people come up to me and say, hey, I really liked it. Oh, thank you. I really liked your newspaper column. These are guys in jail. I had one lady. I'm doing what's called a GSR on her. Gunshot residue test. And she's in the middle of it telling me how much she enjoys my newspaper column. And I'm like, that's great, but we think you killed your husband. Maybe we should talk about that later. I didn't say that to her. But sorry. Next thing you need to do when dealing with opposition is avoid it when you can. Oh, that's out of line. Avoid it when you can. Try to avoid being persecuted. Try to avoid being opposed. Matthew 10:23, when you're persecuted in one town, flee to the next. Now, is Jesus trying to tell us that we should just quit our job if our boss doesn't like us? No. If your wife doesn't like you, should you get a new wife? No, that's not what he's saying. If your kids don't like you, should you get new kids? Maybe. No, I don't think you should. But here's the thing. Because sometimes we fight stupid battles. I used to tell people all the time, is it a big enough hill to die on? Is what you're arguing about so important that you're willing to risk a friendship and all these other things on top of it? And you know what? Most battles aren't. They're really not. And there's some people just like to fight. They just like to argue. And when you're arguing with one of them, you're going to lose because you're not going to sway them no matter what you say. I want to post on Facebook, hey, I changed my presidential vote because of something I read on Facebook. Underneath said no one ever. And there's all this arguing and all this stuff going on. And I'm like, I barely opened Facebook in the last month. I just can't take it. I go in there, I do some stuff for the church, and that's it. I read about a pastor who was, and every pastor has this, every church has what Gordon MacDonald called VDPs. Very draining people. My church in I won't say what church because some of them listen, but one of my churches, I would have a little old lady that I would avoid on my way to the pulpit every Sunday. Or into worship, because I knew that I was going to get 15 minutes about her gout and her rheumatism and how she didn't have any place to park and how, can you help me with my bills this week? And she just had this long litany of things. I never had a positive conversation with her. Never. Not one time in this woman's life was anything good ever happening to her. And sometimes that's just hard to hear. Some people spend all their time griping about everything. Wow, the pew, it's cold in here. Pastor, can you turn the sound system down? It hurts my ears. At Faith Assembly, our soundboard, I don't know why they did it this way, but the soundboard was in the front of the church, in a little room off the front of the church. Eventually we moved to the balcony. But I ran sound, and somebody would say, Jerry, it's too loud. So I'd walk in the room, I'd stand in front of the soundboard, I'd look at it, walk back out. They didn't touch anything. And on the way out, you go to people, oh yeah, it's good, it's good. It's all in your head. My boss calls people EGRs, extra grace required. And look, there are some people that are just, they're gonna be hard to deal with. Doesn't mean you don't have to deal with them, because you do. You gotta love them. But you may want to limit your time with them. I read about a pastor who was having a tough time in his church, and that happens. When you're a pastor, that happens. You go through tough times, man. People get their nose out of joint, and all kinds of things happen. This pastor said this. He said, I used to devote my time to trying to save the world. Now I'm just trying to save my hide. You ever feel like that? Like, I want to save the world, but right now I'm just trying to save my own behind.
How can you save the world if you use yourself?
Well, that's true. But a lot of this is because there are people who just like to argue. There are people who like to be contrary. Sky's blue. No, I believe it's more of a teal today. Oh, shut up. You're a moron. When we deal with people who oppose us, there needs to come a time when we say, you know what? I got better things to do than fight with you. I got better things to do. I think I'll move on because I can be more effective somewhere else. Don't fight unnecessary battles. In college, these guys were theology students, and they would argue about Arminianism versus all this other stuff. They just go on and on and on and on and on. And they're arguing about minutia. Well, do you really think in verse 23 that the word should have been at or should have been is? What? What do you care? And they weren't things that changed anything. They were studying what they call textual critics. Textual critic goes through the Bible word by word and assigns it A, B, C. A, it absolutely should be there. B, we're not sure. C, it absolutely shouldn't be there. Every single word. And tell me how that's helping people find Jesus? Because it ain't. That's a purely academic exercise that doesn't mean anything except to you and your other egghead buddies. Don't fight unnecessary battles. I'd rather win the loss to Jesus than battle over which version of the Bible I should be reading out of. You know, there are churches that are King James only. YouTube is full of these guys. I have a Twitter feed that I follow all about these preachers. Well, if it's not the 1611 King James Bible, then it's not God's word. Really? Because I got news for you. The 1611 Bible, they'll say, oh, these are all just translations. They're all translations. Unless you're reading the Greek or the Hebrew, they're all translations. They all started somewhere else. And these guys are so narrow-minded they can look down a straw with both eyes. They've just got little tiny beady eyes. You know what? If I could find a Bible, as long as they're not like taking out stuff and saying things that are wrong, if I can find a Bible that makes it easier for me to read God's word, that's the Bible I ought to be reading. But choose carefully. You don't want to read the Jehovah's Witnesses call theirs? They have their own version of the Bible. Yeah, I would say it's not international, but it's something like that. Look, my Old Testament professor was one of the translators of the New International Version of the Bible. And he talked to us about what went on in the rooms where they're updating the verbiage from King James to the New International Version. They went back to the original documents and were reading. I asked Dr. Williams a question in class one time. And he said, I don't know, Jerry, let's go look. So we go up to his office, and he's pulling down these huge books, and some of them he's reading backwards because they're in Hebrew. The dude had forgotten more about the Bible than I will ever know. Came into class one day, and he wrote a passage out of the book of Isaiah, and then proceeded to write it in like 10 or 12 different Old Testament era languages. Some of them were little pictures. He's drawing them with chalk. Okay, I'll say that Doc Williams knows his stuff. Don't fight unnecessary battles. We have people that argue with Doc Williams in class. Really? You're going to school to learn 1/10 of what he knows, 100th of what he knows, and you're going to argue with him?
How did that work out?
Not well. Because Doc Williams will crush you. It always amazes me when guys come to the ranch. We've got this system for cleaning the rooms, and we've got this way we do things, and all of a sudden they got a better way. Well, I'll tell you what, Sparky, learn it the way we do it, and then if you got a wrinkle, we'll talk about it. But don't come out here, yeah, well, I'm here, now things are going to really run well. Shut up, Sparky. Shut up.
We'll make triangles.
Shut up. I don't know how we survived without you all this time. Fourth, clarify your priorities. What is important to you? Your number one priority, obviously, ought to be living a Christian life. One of the best things that comes out of being opposed or persecuted is that it sharpens your focus. After 9/11, after now that this COVID has hit, people are focusing more on God. It's been amazing. Why? Because they realize that death is out there. It's not going to last. This won't last long. It didn't after 9/11. It won't now. But it's important for us to reevaluate our priorities. It's important for us to do the right thing at the right time. So what should our priorities be? Well, first of all, we should follow in the footsteps of Jesus. What did Jesus do? That's a pretty good way to find it. Again, what's the name of the series? True North. Jesus is our true north. So let's follow in his footsteps. If you follow his footsteps, you can't go wrong. You can't get lost. Matthew 10:24, students are not greater than their teacher, and slaves are not greater than their master. Jesus is saying, look, the things I've suffered, you're going to suffer. You're going to have to follow his footsteps. You're going to have to go through some of what he went through. The good news is because he's overcome it, he will give you the strength to overcome it as well. We need to strive to please God and not men. This is huge. This is huge. If you leave here and you just want to please all the people around you, you're going to die. You're going to go bad. I love the story of this old man and his grandson, and they got a mule named Heine. You ever heard the story? Heine the mule. So they decide, well, Heine's getting on in age. We need to just go sell him for whatever money we can get and buy another one. So they're leading him down the road, and somebody comes by and says, and the grandson's riding on Heine. So somebody comes by and says, hey, you know what? That's really cruel, man. You got that old man walking and the kid riding there. The old man should be riding and the kid should be walking. Well, they don't want to look bad to the neighbors, so the old man climbs up on top of Heine, and he's riding. And they passed by somebody else later, and he said, you know what? That's cruel. That's cruel. Got this old man on the mule and the little kid walking. They should both be on the mule, so they both get on the mule. They're riding. Passed by a little bit later, and somebody says, that's cruel. Look at both of them on top of that poor old broken down mule. That mule's so bad, they ought to be carrying that mule. So the old man and the grandson, they pick up Heine the mule, and they're carrying him on their shoulders. And they get to this rickety rope bridge. And as they're trying to get across the rickety rope bridge with this mule on their shoulders, they tip, and he gets too top heavy, and Heine the mule falls to his death in the valley below. And the moral of this story is, if you try to please everybody, you lose your Heine. Wow. It's true, though. Look, man, as a pastor, I know that every Sunday, there's a possibility somebody's going to be mad at me. Either because of something I preach, or because they didn't like the music selection, or this or that or the other thing. I know that's going to happen. I know that coming up here at the ranch, Every group, there's going to be somebody discontented about something. I know that when I give directions, some of you guys are going to be mad at me. I don't want to do that. Life is harder than you die. Matthew 10:28, don't be afraid of those who want to kill your body. They can't touch your soul. Fear only God, who can destroy both soul and body in hell. We can't worry about what people say. Now, if somebody comes to you in godly love and says, hey, brother, I just want you to know that I noticed something that maybe you need to think about. Maybe you have a sin. Here's the thing. If somebody does that, the Holy Spirit will probably have already prepared you for it, and it'll be a confirmation of what's going on. I love when people come up and say, I know God's will for your life. Really? Because I got a mailbox and God knows where I live. I like this quote. Somebody once said, I don't know the secret to success, but I know the secret to failure is trying to please everybody. Our church at Remnant was put together with the express idea of helping people who either weren't comfortable in regular church or for some reason didn't feel good in like a regular church. So we stripped away a lot of the barriers. We don't take an offering. We dress casually. We took away all the stuff that makes people not want to come to church. And you get there, man, we're going to preach Jesus to you and love you. That's what Remnant is all about. And we've had people who came in who wanted to change us. Well, you know, you guys really ought to be wearing shirt and tie. Okay. We're not going to do it, but okay. You know, opinions like belly buttons, everybody's got one. We've had people who came into the church and they wanted us to do this or do that, or they wanted us to use this version of this, blah, 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 blah. All these things, all these ideas to change the fundamental idea of what Remnant is. And every time it comes up, Jeremiah and I will look at each other and we'll say, okay, but is that part of our official charter? Is that who we are? Is that who God called us to be? No. And they leave us and go to another church where they're much happier for a while. Because some people aren't going to be happy no matter what. And if you try to please those people, you chase your tail end all the time. And we know who God called us to be. We know the kind of church God called us to have. And if you don't like it, that's great. There are plenty of great churches out there. Remnant just isn't the one for you. And we don't make any apologies about that. We know who God made us and who God expects us to be. And when you're secure in your life about knowing who you are and who God made you to be, you're great. Bill Wilson said, nobody understands the call of God on a man's life but the man God calls. God may call you to do something and everybody say, well, why would you do that? I'm third generation preacher in my family. I'm the only one in my family that's ever pastored a church like this. And a couple of, my uncle, bless his heart, when my uncle, he said, well, Jerry, is that really, you think that's the way church ought to be? I said, yeah, I really do, Uncle Bill. I think there's a place for that kind of church. And to his credit, he said, okay, man, then you got to do what God wants you to do. My uncle wouldn't have been comfortable necessarily pastoring Remnant. But that's okay. That's not who God called him to be. Galatians 1. Obviously, I'm not trying to win the approval of people, but of God. If pleasing people were my goal, I would not be Christ's servant. Because if you're a Christian and you're serving Christ, there are going to be people who don't like what you do. Bottom line. We should boldly speak out for Christ. Everyone who acknowledges me publicly here on earth, I will also acknowledge before my Father in heaven. But everyone who denies me here on earth, I will also deny before my Father in heaven. When we face opposition, we have a choice. Face it like a Christian or not. When something doesn't go your way, you could try to fall back on your old anger and your old ways of dealing with things, or you can say, you know what? I'm a new creature. I'm a new creation in God. The old way of doing things is what got me in trouble. There's a new way of doing things. I'm going to try and do it a new way. We have it here all the time. Look, you're in a house full of guys. You're working with other guys. You're going to butt heads. You're going to. Somebody's going to do something you don't like. Probably going to be Scotty. No, I'm just kidding. Probably going to be me. Okay? But somebody's going to do something you don't like. And in that moment, you have a choice. How are you going to handle it? Are you going to handle it like a Christian? Or are you going to go back to being the guy who doesn't do things the right way? Every time you're at work, every time you're somewhere, you have a choice. You can either react like a Christian, like Jesus would have you react, or you can choose not to do it that way. When you choose not to do it that way, then you're going to have problems. When you find yourself facing opposition, it's time to clarify your priorities and make certain that God is at the top of the list. If you want to be successful in life, Christianity, you're going to face opposition. It's going to happen. It just is. But the opposition you face doesn't have to sideline or subtract from you. In fact, it can strengthen you. You're going to go through rough times. You got problems, I got problems, all got children got problems. The dividing line in everybody's life is not that they have problems, because everybody has them. The dividing line is how you handle the problems. Am I going to handle this through Christ? Am I going to let Jesus give me the wisdom and the guidance, and then am I going to follow it? Because it doesn't do you any good to know what to do if you don't do it. In fact, James says, the book of James says, if you know to do good and you don't do it, it's sin. So if you know what you're supposed to be doing, if you know how you're supposed to react, it makes it a lot easier to do it that way. Now, I've kind of done you a disservice, because now you can't say, well, nobody ever told me. Yeah, well, some fat bald guy did.
I had a lot of bald dudes that were like super wise in my life.
Yeah?
They would always tell me that they'd give me some wisdom, and they'd be like, down the line when you're much older, you're going to look back and you say that old line.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm right now. I am right now. No. Look, and a lot of things that I remember thinking, I would hear things. I was at a conference one time, and a pastor speaking said, every man has his price. He's talking about falling into sexual sin. He said, every man has his price. And I was so offended by it. And I went up to Dwight Westar, our district youth director, and I said, look, man, you let this guy say this. This is wrong. I don't have a price. And he looked at me and he said, Jerry, how long have you been in the ministry? I had like a year experience at that point. A year. He says, just wait. Sure enough, that temptation comes. And you think, I'll never get tempted like that. Then a temptation comes and you think, okay, I got to deal with this. So yeah, sometimes you get a nugget of wisdom and then you store it away. Like a chipmunk storing, stuff for the winter. But eventually winter comes. Matthew chapter 10. What's the price of 2 sparrows? 1 copper coin? But not a single sparrow could fall to the ground without your Father knowing it. And the very hairs on your head are numbered. By the way, that's not counted, that's numbered. Now, granted, it's easier to count the number of the hairs on my head than you guys. But I like that because it's not just counted. He doesn't just know how many hairs we have. They have numbers. So when you look at the shower in the morning and say, oh, I lost some hair. God looks down and says, oh man, they lost number 17. I like number 17.
I shaved and molded it.
The very hairs on your head are all on. That's my theory. I don't know if I'm right, but that's my theory. So don't be afraid. You're more valuable to God than a whole flock of sparrows. You, Sparky, you are more valuable to God than a flock of sparrows. Why do we worry? Why do we let ourselves get caught up in all of this stuff with people that are opposing us and all this? Look, either God's in control of this and you're going to be okay, or he's not in control of it and we're all toast. What you've got to decide right now, today, this moment, is God my number one priority? If God's my number one priority and I'm doing the things that he's called me to do, I'm working toward loving him, I'm working toward being closer to him. If that's the way your life is being lived, you're going to make it. Are you going to have rough times? Absolutely. We all have rough times. It happens. That's also partly how you grow. But God's going to see you through. You are more valuable to him than a whole flock of sparrows. Talk about how cheap sparrows are. What's the price of 2 sparrows? A penny? But not a single sparrow falls to the ground without God knowing about it. There's nothing that happens in your life God doesn't know about and that God doesn't care about. I've heard people say, well, I'd like to pray about this, but I don't think God cares about something little like this. Wait, was it important enough for you to pray about it? I think God cares about it. Quit thinking of God as this big blue meanie up in heaven, sitting on the throne with a bucket full of lightning bolts ready to zap you into oblivion if you don't do what he wants you to do. That's not God. God is the one that looks at you and says, hey, we need to talk about this. Years ago, my life was transformed. Partly one of the things that really helped build my whole idea of a father. Because when somebody said God was our father, I didn't have a real great relationship with my dad. My dad left when I was a kid. And he was not real supportive of me going in the ministry or anything like that. We were really at odds for years. Thankfully, before he died, we got that all figured out. And he became a Christian. But when they would talk about God as our father, that bothered me because I didn't have a good view of what a father was. And I read this book called The Heart of God. And one of the things he said was that God is that perfect dad that all of us wanted, but none of us had. The God that when you were 5 years old knew that your finger painting was a boat, not a house. The God that when you're 8 years old always had time to play catch. Then when you're 13 and your voice is changing and you're trying to figure out girls, God is the father that always had time to talk to you about it. Always had wisdom for you. And when I started thinking about God in those terms of the father I always wanted but didn't have, I started realizing then how much he cared about me, how much he loves me. That's the God we serve. Not some big blue meanie, not some faraway deity. We have a father who loves us. I just quoted the verse Sunday in Galatians, I think it is, where it says, we can call him Abba Father, Daddy, Papa. That's the kind of relationship you want with God. And if you have that relationship with God, your number one fear is going to be letting him down. My uncle, my grandfather, men that I respected so greatly. And the biggest fear I had was letting them down. They were the closest things to dads that I had. The last thing I wanted to do was let them down. And when you understand that God's your father, it makes it pretty easy to not want to let him down. It's time for us, guys. It's time for us to do this. It's time for us to follow Jesus with all our hearts. It's time for us to understand that there's so much more for us. But we can't get caught up in all this sideways stuff. We can't get caught up in all the little stuff. Yeah, people are going to oppose you, but God's bigger. God's greater. And the sooner you figure that out, the better. Okay? Let's pray. God, thanks. And God, I'll be honest with you, I don't know why you care about us. Just know that you do. God, you love us so much, and you care about us so much. I don't understand it, but I'm glad you do. Father, I pray that you'll help each one of us. God, that we would quit majoring in minors. We would quit worrying about the things that are going wrong and start worrying about the things that are doing right. God, that our hearts would be focused on you. Thanks, God. Thanks for your love. Thanks for your grace. God, help us to get our priorities straight. That living for you is the most important thing. Thanks, Father. Amen. All right. See you guys next week.
Daniel's being weird again.